Alright, time for another deck review, here with the Hungering Parasite paired with the Headsman's Curse. This one is from Eggiwegs, and the aim here is quite clear. Keep the Parasite on the wielder and never let go of it. The Hungering Parasite deck can really be utilized in both hugging it or letting it go, and of the two, the former is for sure the easier one to master and much less fiddly. And with such a survivable and hard-hitting leader, it only seems fitting that he should want to have it and wreak havoc with it. A couple of important notes on the plot card for the Parasite deck is that whoever has the upgrade is uninspired and cannot become inspired. And every fighter within one of the fighter is staggered. And yes, that includes the fighter itself. Also, at the end of the action phase, the bearer of the Parasite must ping one fighter within one, so if there is indeed no other fighter within one, the damage from the Parasite must be tanked by the fighter itself. And just like with the Void-Cursed Thralls, you do indeed choose a friendly fighter at the start of the game to become the lucky one. There's more nuance to it than that, I guess, but in terms of this rather straightforward game plan, that's really all you need to know for now, and I'm sure most of you are already familiar with it. A few words on the Headsman's Curse. They are all about wielding the huge sword terminus and condemning people to inspire via the condemn counters. They are a really solid aggro warband of 4 ethereal fighters with wildly varying degrees of survivability, but at least 2 fighters can do real damage, and the smaller ones have their use as well. The scripter condemns fighters with his ranged attacks, while the sharpener improves the lethality of his own attacks or an adjacent wielder via the wet the blade action. So let's dive into the deck and take a look at the search objectives. First up, we have a kill search for killing someone with either a chain rasp, that is everyone except the leader, or at least killing someone while a chain rasp is supporting. So basically anyone can do the killing, but if the leader kills someone, you need a chain rasp to support the attack. So that's quite an easy search given how competent killers both the leader and the bearer is. No arguments on its inclusion here really. Next up is a 2 glory search for making your second successful supported attack in the same action phase. Quite a tall order obviously, as a 2 glory search should be. Making successful attacks with the leader, especially since all adjacent fighters to him are staggered. Landing attacks should be fairly easy. There are a couple of pushes, out of sequence moves, and an upgrade that alleviates support slightly to make this happen, but this may still end up being a bit of a brick and is generally kind of far-fetched for a 4-man warband to pull off consistently enough, in my opinion, without cards that grant a more straight-up effect, such as the ones found in the Beastbound Assault, for example. I've for sure seen much worse 2 glory searches though, so I am inclined to try to make this work, but we might have to do some minor tweaks in the ploy department, especially to make this happen. I'll return to it later. Heads will roll as a search for getting your 3rd condemn counter, and with you getting those every time you slay a fighter while having support, slaying a condemned fighter or slaying a large fighter. And do take into account those situations stack, so sometimes you will get 3 condemn counters at once. Condemning fighters is quite easy with card tech, as well as the scripter condemning people with his range 3 attacks regardless if he misses or hits. This is one of the more solid searches in the faction deck and a natural inclusion. Off with their head is a victorious duel card with an easier hybrid condition for simply killing someone with your leader. Very solid 2 glory if you kill a leader, or otherwise it's just 1 glory for killing someone with your leader. But he is the one doing most of your attacks, especially with this build, so it's very solid. Quick to judge requires you to have a surviving leader, and at the same time there being 2 or more enemy fights with condemned counters. So counters do get cleared upon death, which makes this slightly trickier in the late game, especially if you play a smaller team with no resurrectable fighters. But anytime prior to the 3rd round, this is fairly easy, especially if you draw into the double snipe upgrade for the scripter. And staying around with the leader is kinda key to your entire game, so relying on that happening isn't really a big deal or caveat. Last of these searches are driven by the curse, which is dirt easy for simply landing an attack with your baned fighter, and it even works if you for some reason hand over the upgrade to an opponent and they land an attack with that fighter. Super solid search. Some kill searches obviously, but with really solid damage output, it's not terribly matchup dependent really. I am a bit so-so on the 2 glory, but we don't really have great options to it, so let's see if we can maybe lean into it a bit more with some alternative power cards later on. Or I will simply have to settle for it to be slightly far-fetched. That's okay. Let's take a look at the end phases. First one is All Rise, which is a hybrid for either having 2 friendly fighters with raise counters. The leader can raise fighters when he kills someone, and there's also 1 ploy to support this, but that is it. So as a first round card, it's quite far-fetched. The hybrid option here though is where it's at, where it only requires 1 raised friendly fighter, while 1 enemy fighter is out of action, which is a lot more feasible. And for 2 glory, I will take it for sure. Judge lest ye be judged is quite hard to say for Swede, I guess. This sounds really easy with move/charge tokens on everybody, but do keep in mind that raised fighters come back without tokens. And if we raise late, we might block this one out. I mean, apart from that, it's silly easy, but I still want to mention our colliding goals here, so let's return to this one. It's just 1 glory after all, so if we have something else in the same kind of ballpark of easy scoring, I will probably swap this one out. Savoring the inevitable is next for a friendly fighter being adjacent to a wounded or condemned enemy fighter. This should be easy enough to set up, but don't let this stop you from attacking said enemy fighter later on. I mean, if you miss, you score it. And if you hit, you get the same amount of glory. There are situations though where you don't want to hit, since keeping that fighter alive will make it eligible for you to possibly hand over the ping damage from the plot card. So do take all of these considerations into account. Beyond Exhausted kind of sounds like a fighter having 3 move counters from the title, but it's really only the baned one having 1. That's silly easy really, but just a single glory. Not that it should be more than 1, mind you. Far and Wide is very solid for a strong leader type with this build for holding an objective with your baned fighter, and 1 extra if that objective is in enemy territory. Your whole plan is to do everything with this fighter, so holding an objective for 2 glory with him, that's just silly good. And talking about silly good cards, never mind the first condition on powerful pawn, but the second one with simply being in enemy territory with your baned dude is honestly overpowered as heck. That shouldn't even be 1 glory in my opinion. To be honest, I don't think the objective should even exist. That's just ridiculous for 2 glory. So with these 3 objectives, make a move action into enemy territory onto an objective and score 5 glory for doing so. That's baffling. Well, let's take a look at Judge lest ye be judged then. Well, I'd actually dump it and go for Cursed Tyrant, as that's just super solid. Basically slap 3 upgrades on your leader, because the Bane of Heroes count towards these 4 upgrades, and you score 2 glory for doing so. Yes, it's a bit tough for round 1, but extremely solid for round 2 and 3. And if you lose your leader, you're probably in a tough spot anyway. This is akin to Loaded with Plunder for Ripper Snarlflang, and that card is always a give and take for them. Gambits then. Condemned Step Forward is a switcheroo between 2 adjacent fighters, and if any one of them are enemies, they get condemned as well. An obvious inclusion, and depending on the board state, this could set up support as well to help with the far-fetched 2 glory search previously mentioned. Damning Scream is free condemn counters. Yes please. It's not super important in this build in a way, since we can't, and we don't need to inspire our leader, but we still have some objectives counting on doing so. And the other ones benefit greatly from inspiring. If the scripter is dead, I'd rather try to get him back on than salvage this card, if I can help it. Unless you already have scored what you need and inspired off the condemned counters, then I probably would go ahead and salvage this one. Remember, the leader can't inspire anyway. Hold Them Still is reacting to another friendly fighter's move action, ending adjacent to an enemy fighter to move and provide support. That's super solid of course, and has great synergy with several objectives, not least the 2 glory search. Roaming Witness is remove a chain rest from play and replace it in an edge checks for the cost of a charge token. Could save us from being in a scary spot, and also could help set up support, leading into our own activations or even the end phase cards with being adjacent to a condemned or wounded fighter. So yeah, there are some uses for it. I do think we have better positioning cards, to be honest, and since we don't need to have tokens on everyone here anymore after removing that objective, the charge token is more of a detriment than it otherwise would be. You Must Serve is our free resurrect, which we really can't do without, of course. Then we have maybe one of the best ping cards in the game right now, with Malefic Siphon doing what Gorath does with his spell and what Lady Harrow can only do while adjacent. Simply wild ping damage and heal in a hybrid here. Amazing card and an auto include. Pulse of Hunger rolls a magic dice for every fighter within one of our hero and deals a damage on a crit, otherwise staggers them. Do keep in mind that you roll for each. The stagger is really unnecessary given we are range 1 and auto stagger everyone anyway, not with a token, but still. And since we don't score off of having stagger tokens specifically, the only merit for this card's inclusion could be the damage, but I would never take a card that does something useful on the result of a crit alone, and in a ultra feels bad man scenario, this damages our own fighter only. I think I will get rid of this card. Sudden Swap is another switcheroo for 2 adjacent fighters, reads like a situational push for our main man, and it's not the worst card in the world, but I do actually think we have better push cards, so I will return to it later. The Curse Demands is a straightforward push 1 for the hero. Not very exciting design, but obviously an auto include. The Curse Empowers gives Grievous 1 in the next activation, or +1 damage instead if it is for the Baned hero. And it most likely is. The Grievous is restricted to range 1 or 2, but the +1 damage is unrestricted. So I mean, if you want a Bane of Hero your scripter, I guess, nuke away. In all seriousness though, I think it's a very solid inclusion if we Bane a hero that only does 2 damage, but I'm not sure it's really necessary since we are doing 3 damage from the bat. So I might be inclined to leave this one at home. Okay, so I think we could do some work on the Gambits here, as there are a handful of cards left out that I would like to see included. And if I haven't hammered in the fact prior to this video, I think pushes are amazing and should never be left out. Drawn to the Kill is a great push card. Your opponent will do everything in their power to stay clear of your Baned hero, not only from the scary attack, but from the ping occurring at the end of the round, and you will want to make sure you can hand over the damage as well, so this will for sure go in my deck here. Helping Hands is a card I want to see included as well, not necessarily a card I would be mad about in any other scenario, but with the 2 Glory Search included and the fact that we get condemned counters from landing attacks with support, I think the synergy here is pretty good. Just in Case is another card that pushes us, somewhat restricted, but there is bound to be a condemned or wounded fighter somewhere on the board we can push towards. Doesn't need to be the closest one, and we also don't need to end up to the one we push against. I also quite like Tempting Lure, as it's very versatile in how we use it. Use it to set up support or push your hero next to an enemy fighter to smash him, or position yourself to hand over the ping in a later activation. So many uses for this card. Somewhat brainy card to make the best use of, I guess, but very solid once we wrap our head around it. Okay, so first up I'll ditch the +1 damage and or Grievous card, as it's just not gonna be totally necessarily most of the time, and I just generally feel accuracy or pushes are way better inclusions if you don't really need the damage, and I don't think we do here. So I'll remove that one to make way for more vital ones. I'll also ditch the Pulse of Hunger if that wasn't clear before. I'll also ditch Roaming Witness. It's not a bad card, but I think straight up pushes are better, quite frankly, and we also aren't punished with a charge token from making that card happen. And lastly, I'll ditch the Sudden Swap, as I think the extra support cards and these push cards are easier to find a use and situation for. Let's take a look at the upgrades. First up we have Enduring Executor. Your leader is already 5 wounds and thus large, so no real detriment in buffing him further, and if not for him, the smaller ones could surely make use of it as well. Guided Blows is amazing for this build with the double rerolls, then paired with the auto stagger from the Bane of Heroes, and we do indeed need accuracy. We only have 2 hammers on our leader with no additional rerolls, cleave or ensnare on his fighter card. So yeah, me likey. Despairing Strength is Grievous or +1 damage if it goes onto the Baden one. So yeah, further reasons not to need the plus damage ploy really. This will make the wielder truly scary if he wasn't already. Stolen Vigor is especially scary on Mollog. Move, charge, and then remove the charge, and then charge again. Ay caramba. But even here we could, for example, start our round adjacent to an enemy fighter, off their head, then in the next activation, charge off with another head, and then react with removing the charge, then move, charge, or activate yet again. You won't always find a use for it, I guess, but the potential power move combos are pretty mad, and you will obviously activate your hero a lot with this build. Tenacious Resilience is a bit of a weird one though, and I know Eggiwegs has consulted me on this card prior to this video and decided to sack this card, since it's more of a swap the Parasite around kind of a card and not really useful if you want to go for a permaband build. Wicked Aim doesn't work on the wielder as he is large, but it's pretty scary on the bearer specifically. 2 range, 2 hammers for 3 damage is pretty nasty, and including 1 or 2 cards for the little guys is pretty reasonable, as having more than one threat will make you less predictable, I guess. A Cackling Nightmare is the double whammy for the scripter. Chilling Grasp means adjacent enemy fighters cannot make move actions. Not a card I would normally be mad about, but I rate it pretty highly here because putting it on the banned one ensures that the enemy can't move away late activation to deny your ping. They can still push away obviously, but they are relying on card tech then. Heavy Duty is +1 damage on a Chain Rasp, basically always goes on the bearer, I guess. That's 2 range, 2 hammers with 4 damage inspired if you have the Wicked Aim on him as well. That's pretty nasty. And he's 4 wounds as well, so. Lastly, we have Lurking Crony for support to an adjacent friendly fighter. It's here to further help to score the 2 Glory Surge and collect counters, but I guess most of the time you are adjacent to another friendly fighter, you are also adjacent to the target, or at least you will try to be, especially with the out-of-sequence moves and all the pushes we have. So maybe it feels slightly redundant, so I will take a look at removing that one. From the Bane deck, after consulting it a bit, I think Frenetic Effort and Instinctive Reprisals looks pretty nasty. The first one lets us do an action to stun and then push 1, and if we are the bearer of the Bane of Heroes, then we also get to make a range 1 attack action after the push. I know the stun is a moot point here, but pushing 1 into a better position, we could even stun 1 enemy, leave him, and push onto a more desirable enemy to attack, leaving the first enemy staggered, even if we're not adjacent to that one anymore. So this is very akin to Sneaky Stab Stab, which is a great card for Spite Claw's Swarm. Instinctive Reprisal does nothing against attacks from range 2 or further away, but the scariest attacks are generally range 1 attacks, and this will discourage enemies from messing with our Baned heroes even further unless they really have the damage output to take him out in one go. I kinda like the deterring effect this might have. Sure, this will lead the enemy into dealing with all the other dudes first, but that's also pretty fine for our game plan generally. So yeah, I really like that one. I think I would like to find a place for both of these upgrades, to be honest. I think I'll ditch the assist for adjacent friendly fighters, and I'll also get rid of the Tenacious Resilience, as that one was basically already out of the question. So yeah, so to recap, I didn't touch the searches, but I removed one of the 1 glory objectives to swap in the 3 upgrades on top of the Bane of Heroes one for 2 glory. I swapped no less than 4 Gambits out for more push, out of sequence moves, and extra support. I removed an upgrade that really is not very usable for keeping your Parasite on the same fighter game plan, and ditched the support for adjacent friendly fighters and swapped in a retaliation reaction and a card akin to Sneaky Stab Stab for some push shenanigans. That is it, and here is the complete tweaked deck if you want to give it the old twirly whirly. If you want to have your deck featured and reviewed here, click the old join button below and I'll fix you up with a fresh member invite code for the Discord. Have a great day. Cheers. Bye. This is me again, chiming in to thank you for watching the video. Please don't forget to like, subscribe and comment. All of those things help me out immensely. If you feel so inclined, do consider to become a member to gain a greater influence over the content, early access, and just generally help me out. If you like this particular video especially much, feel free to click the thanks button as well to leave a small donation. All of those things are 100% optional, and I will never keep videos permanently locked behind a paywall, as my main goal is to spread the love for these games as much as possible. A special thanks to my members, whose legendary names are scrolling right before your eyes at this very instant. Don't forget, the games are not only about winning, but also creating unforgettable memories with your friends and opponents. That's it for me. See you soon. Bye bye.